VIP millionaire mocks elderly black maid, next day a knock on his suite changes everything. Kora Johnson, a 62-year-old maid newly employed at the prestigious Regency Grand Hotel, smoothed her crisp red and white uniform, bracing herself for another day of blending into the background. After decades spent in service jobs, including over 20 years working in a diner, Kora now found herself navigating a new world of wealth and luxury. What she didn't know was that this day would lead to an encounter that would leave her shaken and change her life forever. When Millionaire VIP guest Reginald Blackwood summoned Kora to his suite, she had no idea what awaited her behind those lavish doors. What unspeakable event could transpire in a place of such splendor that it might break the spirit of a woman who had endured so much over the years? And what would happen the next morning, with just a single knock on the millionaire's door, that would alter the lives of everyone at the Regency Grand Hotel? Before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching or listening from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. The soft glow of the bedside lamp highlighted Kora's weathered hands as she carefully buttoned her uniform. At 62, her fingers lacked the nimbleness of youth, but they moved with practiced efficiency, the result of a lifetime in service. She smoothed the front of her dress, her reflection in the small mirror showing a woman who carried herself with quiet dignity, despite the weight of her years. Her modest apartment was small but spotless, a testament to her meticulous nature. As she gathered her things for the day, her gaze lingered on a faded photograph, a younger version of herself standing proudly in front of the diner where she'd worked for over 2 decades. That job, like so many others, had come and gone, leaving her to confront the harsh truth. Retirement was a luxury she couldn't afford. The chill of the early morning air greeted her as she stepped onto the quiet street. On the bus ride to the Regency Grand Hotel, the neighborhoods outside the window transformed, gradually becoming wealthier and more imposing. Kora couldn't help but feel out of place, a sensation she was all too familiar with but never entirely at peace with. The Regency Grand loomed ahead, its gleaming exterior a towering symbol of opulence. Taking a deep breath, Kora steeled herself for another day of invisibility. Entering through the staff entrance, she exchanged quiet nods with other employees beginning their shift. The grandeur of the hotel lobby, with its sparkling chandeliers and marble floors, still managed to overwhelm her, even after weeks of working there. As Kora navigated the back corridors, she observed the hotel buzzing to life. Chefs barked orders in the kitchen amid the clang of pots and pans, bellhops dashed to and fro, their uniforms immaculate, and maids, some younger, some older like her, pushed carts laden with fresh linens and cleaning supplies. At the supply closet, Kora meticulously prepared her cart, each item placed just so, finding a small semblance of control in a world where she often felt powerless. The morning passed in a blur of routine. Kora worked her way through the rooms, changing linens with military precision, polishing surfaces until they shone, and scrubbing bathrooms spotless. Every room she cleaned erased the traces of one guest, making way for the next, who would likely pass by her as if she didn't exist. Whispers among her co-workers buzzed in the background as she worked. "Did you hear about the VIP staying here this week?" a young maid whispered excitedly. "A millionaire." "Great," another replied sarcastically. "Another rich guy who thinks the world revolves around him." "Sure," someone else hissed. "Do you want to get fired?" Kora kept her head down, ignoring the chatter. Over the years, she'd learned the value of staying out of trouble by staying silent. By late morning, she found herself on the top floor, where the hotel's most exclusive suites were located. Here, the carpet was thicker, the wallpaper more ornate, and the very air seemed to shimmer with privilege. Kora paused to catch her breath, leaning on her cart. For a fleeting moment, she closed her eyes and imagined what it might feel like to be one of the guests, to walk with confidence, to be seen, to matter. But the sharp ring of a house phone shattered the fantasy, pulling her back to reality. She adjusted her uniform and pushed her cart forward. The hushed atmosphere changed abruptly as the elevator dinged. out stepped a tall man in an impeccably tailored suit, his salt and pepper hair styled to perfection. He exuded authority, his sharp gaze sweeping the corridor. Flanking him were two young assistants, tapping away on their tablets, and trailing behind them were bellhops struggling under the weight of expensive luggage. This, Kora realized, was the VIP everyone had been whispering about. The man's commanding voice cut through the air. "You there," he barked, his eyes narrowing on Kora as if she were a smudge on an otherwise pristine surface. "Make sure my suite is spotless. I won't tolerate any mistakes." Before she could respond, he swept past, his entourage trailing behind like a royal procession. Kora stood frozen for a moment, heart racing. No sooner had he disappeared than her manager, Mr. Thompson, hurried toward her, his face flushed and glistening with sweat. "Johnson!" he barked, snapping her back to attention. Mr. Thompson hissed, grabbing Kora's arm and pulling her to the side. "Did you see him? That was Mr. Reginald Blackwood III. He's one of the most influential businessmen in the country, and he's staying here for the next week." Kora nodded silently, still trying to process the encounter. "Listen to me very carefully," Mr. Thompson continued, his grip tightening slightly. "Mr. Blackwood is extremely important to this hotel. His stay could mean big things for all of us. Do you understand?" Kora nodded again, saying nothing. "Good," Mr. Thompson said, the tension in his voice now underlined with a clear warning. "I'm assigning you to be on call for anything Mr. Blackwood need. Whatever he wants, whenever he wants it, you drop everything and make it happen. Is that clear?" "Yes, Mr. Thompson," Kora replied softly, her stomach twisting with anxiety. "And Johnson," he added, lowering his voice to a near whisper, "if anything goes wrong, if he's unhappy in any way, it's on you. Do you understand what I'm saying?" The threat was unmistakable. Kora swallowed hard and nodded once more. "Excellent," he said, his face breaking into a forced smile. "Now, Mr. Blackwood has requested a glass of our finest red wine to be delivered to his suite in exactly 30 minutes. You'll handle that, won't you, Johnson?" It wasn't really a question, and they both knew it. Kora murmured her assent as Mr. Thompson strode away, already barking orders at other staff members. Left alone in the hallway, Kora took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. In all her years of service, she had dealt with difficult guests before, but something about this situation felt different. The pressure, the expectation, and the barely veiled threats combined into a weight that pressed heavily on her shoulders. She glanced at her watch, 28 minutes until the wine was due. With a quiet sigh, she straightened her uniform and headed toward the service elevator. Descending to the hotel's expansive wine cellar, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was heading into a storm, one that might sweep her away if she wasn't careful. The cellar was cool and dimly lit, with rows of bottles stretching endlessly into the shadows. Kora moved carefully among them, her eyes scanning the labels. She needed the perfect wine, anything less could spell disaster. After several minutes, she found it. A bottle of Chateau Margaux, vintage 1982. The price tag made her wince, but she knew this was exactly what Mr. Blackwood would expect. With trembling hands, she carefully removed the bottle from its resting place, cradling it as though it were a fragile newborn. It was worth more than she made in several months. As she ascended in the elevator, the weight of the bottle seemed to mirror the weight of her responsibility. Upstairs, Kora took extra care preparing the wine. She selected the finest crystal glass, polishing it until it sparkled under the light. With practiced precision, she opened the bottle and poured a perfect measure, the deep red liquid glinting in the glow. As the appointed time approached, Kora checked her appearance in the hallway mirror. She smoothed her uniform, tucked stray gray hairs back into place, and took a deep, steadying breath. The face staring back at her was lined with years of hard work and quiet endurance. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of pride in her professionalism, her ability to persist despite the odds. But as she picked up the silver tray with the wine, her confidence faded, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. Each step toward Mr. Blackwood's suite felt heavier than the last. Standing before the grand double doors, she hesitated, gathering her courage. Then, with a steadying breath, she raised her hand and knocked. The sound echoed in the hushed hallway. "Enter," came a commanding voice from inside. Kora turned the handle, pushing open the door, and stepped into the opulent suite. Plush carpets silenced her footsteps as soft, golden light poured from the chandeliers above. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city skyline, a view Kora had only ever seen from the ground. Her eyes quickly found Mr. Blackwood, lounging in a high-backed leather armchair. His sharp gaze swept the room before landing on her. "Your wine, sir," Kora said softly, her voice steady despite the flutter of nerves in her chest. Blackwood's eyes flicked up to meet hers briefly, his expression one of disdain. "Set it down here," he said, gesturing dismissively toward a side table. Carefully, Kora moved to the table, acutely aware of Blackwood's eyes tracking her every motion. As she placed the tray, she noticed the way his gaze lingered on her hands, weathered, calloused, and bearing the marks of decades of hard labor. "How long have you worked here?" Blackwood asked, his tone almost casual but carrying an edge. "A few weeks, sir," Kora replied, keeping her eyes respectfully lowered. Blackwood chuckled, a sound devoid of warmth. "Let me guess," he said, leaning back, "you thought this job was your ticket to a cushy retirement. A chance to rub elbows with your betters." Kora felt heat rising to her cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral. "Your job," Blackwood continued, his tone sharpening, "is to be invisible. To clean up our messes without being seen or heard. To remember your place." Without waiting for a reply, he flicked his cigar, scattering ashes onto the pristine carpet. "Well, isn't that your job? Clean it up." Before exhaling slowly, smoke curled around Kora's head, or perhaps it was just her lack of imagination. An inability to see herself as anything more than a servant. "Tell me," Blackwood drawled, "did you ever dream of something better? Or have you always known this was your lot in life?" Kora remained silent, her jaw clenched tight against the words threatening to spill out. She had dreamed once, of course. Dreamed of a life where her hard work would be recognized, where she could hold her head high. But dreams, she had learned, were luxuries she simply couldn't afford. As she finished polishing his shoes as best she could with her limited supplies, Blackwood leaned back in his chair, a self-satisfied smirk playing on his lips. "That will do," he said, waving her away as though shooing an annoying fly. "You can go now. Oh, and next time you come in, do try to be less visible. Your presence is rather distracting." Kora stood slowly, her knees protesting from the time spent on the hard floor. She smoothed her uniform in an attempt to regain a shred of dignity. "Is there anything else you need, sir?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Blackwood's eyes narrowed, a cruel glint flickering in them. "Need? From you?" He chuckled dryly. "I think not. Just remember your place, and we'll get along just fine. Now, get out of my sight." With a small nod, Kora turned and walked toward the door, her steps careful and measured. She could feel Blackwood's gaze on her back, and could almost hear the smug satisfaction radiating from his silence. It was only when the door closed behind her that she let her shoulders slump, the weight of the encounter pressing down on her like a physical burden. For a moment she stood there in the hallway, her back against the door, trying to gather herself. The plush carpet, the ornate wallpaper, the soft lighting, all of it seemed to mock her. This was a gilded cage, trapping her in a world where she would never truly belong. Drawing a deep, shuddering breath, Kora straightened her spine and smoothed her uniform again. She had endured. She had survived. And no matter what indignities she faced, she would continue to do so. Yet, as she walked away from Blackwood's suite, a small part of her, a part she thought had gone silent long ago, cried out in protest against the injustice of it all. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into hers. "Mr. Blackwood isn't just a guest, Johnson. He's a kingmaker. His word can make or break hotels like ours. If he leaves satisfied, it could mean millions in revenue, expansion opportunities, connections to high-profile guests. But if he's unhappy, Thompson trailed off, letting the implications hang heavily in the air. But sir, Kora finally found her voice, though it emerged as barely more than a whisper, I didn't do anything wrong. Mr. Blackwood, I don't want to hear it, Thompson snapped, slamming his hand on the desk. The sharp noise made Kora flinch. I don't care what happened, what he did or didn't do. All I care about is that he's happy. And right now, because of you, he isn't. He stood, towering over the desk. Let me make this very clear to you, Johnson, he said, his tone dropping into a menacing growl. Your job, your only job, is to keep the guests happy. Not to have feelings. Not to have dignity. Certainly not to create scenes that demand my personal involvement. Kora felt tears pricking the corners of her eyes but blinked them back furiously. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. I'll say this once, Thompson continued, his voice icy. If Mr. Blackwood has any further complaints about you, if he even hints at being dissatisfied because of you, you're done. Not just here, but in every hotel in this city. I'll personally make sure you never work in this industry again. Do you understand me? The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Kora felt as if the floor had vanished beneath her. This job, demeaning and draining as it was all she had. At her age, with no formal education, where else could she go? I asked you a question, Johnson, Thompson barked, jolting her from her spiraling thoughts. Do you understand? Yes, sir, Kora managed, her voice small and defeated. I understand. Thompson sat back down, seemingly satisfied. Good. Now get out of my sight. And remember, I'll be watching you very closely. One more slip-up and you're gone. Kora turned and left the office, her legs feeling like lead. Once the door closed behind her, she leaned against the wall, struggling to steady her breathing. The full weight of her situation came crashing down. She had been humiliated, lied about, and now threatened with losing her livelihood. All for what? For daring to show a moment of human weakness. For not groveling enough in the face of cruelty. As she made her way back to her duties, something inside her began to shift. The quiet dignity she had tried to hold on to, the small flame of self-respect she had nurtured through years of hardship, flickered dangerously, threatening to be extinguished. In its place, a cold, hard knot of despair started to form. Is this all there is? She wondered. Is this what my life will always be? Serving people who see me as less than human, always one misstep away from losing everything? Every guest and employee deserves respect. If you can't abide by that simple rule, then I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to leave. The color drained from Blackwood's face. Leave? You can't be serious. Do you know how much I'm paying for this suite? The amount you're paying is irrelevant, Marcus replied calmly. What matters is how you treat people. And from what I've seen and heard, you've fallen far short of the standards we expect from our guests. Blackwood sputtered, his usual arrogance crumbling under Marcus's unwavering resolve. This is outrageous. I'll sue. I'll ruin you. Marcus remained unperturbed. You're welcome to try, Mr. Blackwood. But I think you'll find that treating people with basic human decency isn't just the right thing to do, it's also protected by law. Now, I'm going to have to ask you to pack your things. A car will be ready to take you to another hotel within the hour. As the reality of the situation sank in, Blackwood's bluster deflated. He looked from Marcus to Kora, his expression a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. For the first time, he seemed to truly see Kora, not as a faceless servant, but as a human being who had stood up to his cruelty. I didn't mean, he began, but Marcus cut him off. Save it, Mr. Blackwood. Your actions speak louder than any words you might offer. Now, please, pack your things. A member of our staff will assist you shortly. Marcus turned to leave, gesturing for Kora to follow. As they reached the door, he paused and looked back at the now silent Blackwood. Oh, and Mr. Blackwood, I suggest you use this experience as an opportunity for reflection. The world is changing, People like Mrs. Johnson aren't invisible anymore. It's high time men like you realize that. As the door closed behind them, Kora felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She looked at Marcus, tears of relief and gratitude welling in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I've never had anyone stand up for me like that before." Marcus smiled, a warm, genuine smile. "Mrs. Johnson, you deserve to be stood up for. What happened to you was wrong, and I'm just sorry I didn't know about it sooner." His expression grew serious. "But our night isn't over yet. We still have one more stop to make." As they walked toward the elevator, Kora realized Marcus was right. There was still one more person to confront, one more wrong to set right. And for the first time in years, she felt ready to face whatever came next. She wasn't alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The elevator ride down was quiet, but it was a different kind of silence. No longer oppressive, it was now filled with a sense of anticipation, of justice about to be served. Kora stood tall beside Marcus, her earlier fear and despair replaced by newfound strength. As they stepped out onto the main floor, Marcus turned to Kora. "Mrs. Johnson, I want you to know that what's about to happen isn't just about Mr. Blackwood. It's about creating a workplace where everyone is treated with respect. Are you ready?" Kora nodded, her voice steady. "Yes, Mr. Holloway. I'm ready." They made their way through the quiet lobby. At this late hour, the hotel was mostly asleep, but they both knew that in the manager's office, Mr. Thompson would still be at his desk. He always worked late, priding himself on his dedication. As they approached the office, they could see the light spilling out from under the door. Marcus knocked firmly, not waiting for a response before opening the door. Mr. Thompson looked up from his desk, his face registering surprise at the unexpected intrusion. His eyes widened as he took in Marcus's imposing figure, then narrowed as he spotted Kora behind him. "Mr. Holloway," Thompson said quickly, standing and smoothing down his tie. "This is unexpected. What can I do for you at this hour?" Marcus stepped into the office, his presence seeming to fill the room. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk about the events of today, specifically your handling of the situation with Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Blackwood." Thompson's eyes darted to Kora, a mixture of anger and fear flashing across his face. "Sir, I can explain. There was a misunderstanding with Mr. Blackwood, but I assure you I handled it appropriately. Mrs. Johnson here was—" Marcus cut him off, his voice firm. "I've heard Mrs. Johnson's account of what happened. I've also just had a very enlightening conversation with Mr. Blackwood. And I have to say, Mr. Thompson, I'm deeply disappointed in how you managed this situation." Thompson's face paled. "Sir, I was just trying to protect the hotel's interests. Mr. Blackwood is a very important guest, and a guest's importance doesn't give them the right to mistreat our staff," Marcus interrupted. "Your job, Mr. Thompson, is not just to cater to wealthy clients. It's to ensure that this hotel runs smoothly and ethically. That includes protecting the dignity and rights of our employees." Thompson's mouth opened and closed, like a fish out of water. "But sir, I was just following protocol. In situations like these, we always side with the guest. It's how we maintain our reputation." Marcus's eyes hardened. Girl runs out crying to garbage man. Minutes later police shut down the street. After heroically saving a girl from her abusive father, the garbage man believed the nightmare was finally over for the traumatized family. However, the abusive ex-husband, furious over his arrest, still blamed them and would stop at nothing, using his wealth and influence to try and get his daughter back. The fragile sense of safety the mother and daughter had started to rebuild would soon be shattered by an unforeseen turn of events. Before we dive into part 2 of this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you're enjoying it so far. As the early morning light crept over the horizon, Marcus Taylor pulled into the garbage collection depot. The events of the previous day still weighed heavily on his mind, a whirlwind of drama that had disrupted his normally routine day. While clocking in, The admin at the front desk informed him that the manager wanted to see him. A ripple of anxiety stirred in Marcus's stomach. He'd known this conversation was coming but hadn't expected it so soon. Rehearsing his explanation in his head, Marcus made his way to the manager's office. He understood he'd broken several company protocols, even though his actions had been driven by good intentions. As he approached the office door, Marcus took a deep breath. The implications of this meeting loomed in his mind. Would he still have a job after this? While he believed he'd done the right thing, would his employer see it that way? With a slightly trembling hand, Marcus knocked on the door. A gruff "come in" sounded from the other side, and Marcus steeled himself before stepping inside. "Good morning, sir," he greeted nervously. The manager, a stocky man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, gestured for Marcus to take a seat. His tone was neutral as he began. "Marcus, I want to hear everything that happened yesterday. I've gotten accounts from others, but I need to hear it directly from you." Taking a deep breath, Marcus launched into his account. He explained how the loosely tied garbage bag filled with brand new items had caught his attention. He described approaching the lady of the house, noticing her distress, and sensing the fear in her daughter's demeanor. Marcus recounted helping the girl as she fled her father and blocking the father's escape from police using the garbage truck. Throughout his recounting, Marcus maintained eye contact with his manager, speaking steadily, confident in the decisions he'd made. To Marcus's surprise, the manager's expression softened slightly as he finished. "Marcus," the manager said, leaning back in his chair, "what you did yesterday was brave. You might have saved lives. But," he continued, his tone turning firm, "I can't have you making heroics a habit. This time, I won't penalize you, but I don't expect to hear about something like this again anytime soon." The manager shifted the conversation to a stern reminder about privacy policies. "You've got to be careful," he warned. "That policy exists not just to protect the public, but to keep you out of trouble. Next time, it might be you facing legal consequences." "I understand, sir," Marcus replied solemnly. "It won't happen again." Satisfied with the response, the manager leaned forward. "Good. Now, there's one more thing. Your regular partner's still out sick, so today you'll be training someone new." As Marcus processed this unexpected announcement, the manager pressed a button on his desk phone. "Send in the new employee," he instructed. Moments later, the office door opened, and a young man stepped inside, his nervous excitement evident. Marcus's eyes were immediately drawn to his striking appearance: dark amber skin, long curly hair tied neatly into a ponytail, and an accent Marcus couldn't quite place. "Hello, I'm Connor," the newcomer introduced himself, his melodic voice carrying a subtle lilt. The manager nodded. "Connor, this is Marcus. He'll be training you today." Turning to Marcus, he added, "Marcus, show him the ropes. Let him drive while you handle collections and mechanics. Make sure he learns the truck's full functionality." With a wave of his hand, the manager dismissed them, leaving Marcus with a pointed reminder. And Marcus, no surprises today. Complete the route on time. As they walked out, Marcus led Connor to their assigned truck, the same one from yesterday's ordeal. The space now felt different with a new partner, creating a subtle tension. "All right, Connor," Marcus said, adopting a professional tone. "Let's start with a walkthrough of the vehicle." As Marcus worked to collect the trash, his thoughts wandered to Rachel and Lucy. He couldn't shake the image of the mother and daughter, likely exhausted and overwhelmed, desperately trying to erase the physical reminders of their ordeal. When Marcus began sorting through their discarded garbage, the items told a story. Shattered photo frames, splintered wood, and a broken baseball bat, all stark reminders of the violence they'd endured. Among the trash, he also noticed Dennis's suitcase and clothes, clear evidence of Rachel's determination to purge her ex-husband's presence from their lives. Just as Marcus reached for Rachel and Lucy's trash bins, Kona's voice called out from the cab. "Hey Marcus, think I can try operating the mechanical arm? There's a lot of garbage here, so it might be good practice." Marcus hesitated, unsure of how to respond. This house felt different, personal even, given everything that had happened yesterday. Kona noticed his pause and looked curious. Is this the house everyone at the depot was talking about? Marcus nodded slowly. Yeah. Something happened here yesterday. You've probably heard about it. Realization dawned on Kona's face. Oh, I see. If you'd prefer, I can wait to practice on another house. Marcus was tempted to agree but remembered his manager's earlier words about maintaining professionalism. With a deep breath, he shook his head. No, it's fine. This is as good a time as any to learn. Come on, I'll guide you through it. He demonstrated the proper techniques, showing Kona how to maneuver the mechanical arm with precision. Kona was cautious at first, but his confidence grew with each attempt. Eventually, Kona turned to Marcus with a grin. I think I've got the hang of it. Do you mind if I handle the next few houses while you drive? Marcus considered the suggestion. Kona had shown decent progress, and Marcus could use a moment to catch his breath. All right, he agreed, climbing into the cab. But take it slow. We can't afford any accidents. Settling into the driver's seat, Marcus kept a close eye on Kona through the rearview mirror, pleased with how efficiently he handled the collection. But something unusual caught his attention.